it play and call it work.
Hey everybody, Mathew here from MiniWarGaming.com, and this is why I love Space Marines. Look at all those multicolored superhumans ready to take on the galaxy's terrors. Where a normal human wouldn't tread, these guys won't even hesitate to go. And in this video, I want to talk to you about our collection and exactly why, probably out of everybody here at MiniWarGaming, I'm the one that likes Space Marines the most. And don't forget after this video to go and click the links in the descriptions, which will give you a few battle reports for our Space Marines in 8th edition 40K. We put a post up on Facebook asking people how many points they thought this was, and the answer is 36,000, roughly, because obviously there's war gear options that aren't always visible on the model, so you can choose the different ones, but roughly 36,000 points. Now this might be a bit of a cheat because we actually have the equivalent of 5 different armies here, 5 different chapters. We've got our Sentinels of the Forge, which you'll notice is the largest one. This is our custom-made chapter. They, in our narrative, are a Salamander successor chapter, and they have some issues with the warp, which are going to be addressed actually pretty soon. In our next Deathwatch campaign, you might see a bit of them. Then we've got a small Raven Guard force, which looks really cool. You have to excuse them all being on the wrong size base because, well, Space Marines have been around for a while, and they started on 25 mils, and now most of them are on 32 mils, except for the bigger guys. We got a little Imperial Fist force, which is very well painted, but also very little. But at least they're on the right size bases, and some custom models in there. Then we've got a good-sized Black Templar force, and they're actually really fun to play with all the special rules that they have. And you can see all their vehicles to the left over there. And then behind them, we've got the White Scars, the bikes, and more bikes and land speeders. These guys love to go fast, and their chapter tactic lets them do so. And then, of course, you have to have the Ultramarines, because who doesn't like Guilliman, right? Everybody loves Guilliman. And this is the Ultramarines chapter. Now, if you look too closely at these, you might see that some of them aren't completely done. Because, to be honest, the Space Marines have been an interesting one in our collection, where we've been using them here and there, but never having one person fully committed to running this army over and over again. And so it kind of gets built ad hoc, little bit by little bit. Now, total number model-wise, throughout all the chapters, we got 268 Tactical Marines, which of course are your bread and butter, although now the Primaris Marines are starting to kick them out of their spot. We've got 100 Scouts. This is largely thanks to the Tyrus incident, where I wanted to play with all Scouts, so we had a bunch of them built for the Sentinels of the Forge. We have 74 Assault Marines ready to rain down from the sky. And 63 Terminators, which, if you ask Steve, are totally useless in 8th edition. We have 84 Bikers, the majority of which are right in front of you in the White Scar Army. We have 25 Land Speeders, that's Land Speeder Storms and regular Land Speeders as well. 14 Mighty Dreadnoughts. We've got 41 Rhino-sized vehicles, that's your Vindicators and Predators, Rhinos, Razorbacks, etc. Got 9 Land Raiders to transport all those Terminators in. 17 Drop Pods. I have a bunch of Flyers. We got 9 Storm Talons, 5 Storm Hawks, and 3 Storm Ravens. And a mighty scratch-built Thunderhawk. A lot of people don't realize it's a scratch-built until they see it alongside. But as soon as I say it's scratch-built, it becomes more obvious. This is actually created by Lee, who now works for us, has worked for us for a while, but he made this before he worked for us. I think he was just using it as his bribe to get in. Now, interestingly enough, I haven't always liked Space Marines. To me, they were just kind of too bland and generic. And when you would read the lore in their codexes, it just didn't seem that interesting. Here's some superhumans who know no fear. They kind of just go in and they clean stuff up. And I was like, well, that's kind of boring. And that the Imperial Guard are way more interesting because they're just your average human and I can relate to them. It wasn't until I read a lot of the Black Library novels, in particular the ones from the Horus Heresy, and also the entire Beast Arises series, that I got to see that really once a writer got hold of the lore of a Space Marine, they made them much more human. The Horus Heresy series in particular was interesting because it would talk about how they know no fear, and because of that, it's also quashed out some of their other emotions. And in fact, it even has one of the Space Marines reflecting on that, saying he's lost a lot of his humanity. Because, yeah, he doesn't know fear, but knowing fear is to be human, is to feel that difference. And so he struggles with that a lot. And so it's just, I thought that was a lot more interesting to see that the Space Marines could be human, but they're almost like humans who have lost their humanity. Kind of a lot like, well, they brought a lot of that lore into the Stormcast Eternals for Age of Sigmar as well. So after reading those books and seeing them and seeing that they are corruptible, they can still fight and bicker, in the end, really, they're just humans that are just stronger and smarter and better than the other average humans out there. And so that made them more interesting to me, realizing that when I make campaigns for them, the Tyrus incident, for example, that had all the scouts, we could really have this camaraderie and we could have this very human element to it while still having the superhuman aspect to it as well. Kind of like the Jedi from Star Wars. Yes, they're very powerful, but they're just human in the end. They're just humans that are augmented with other abilities. The other thing that wasn't really that interesting to me was the look of the models. They just, I say generic, but obviously they've been making their Space Marines for a lot longer than the other places have been making Space Marines. But over time, as they've come up with new models and new ways for things to look, they've left just the, we don't just make blocky looking things, that they've actually added in with the new Primaris models, for example. There's a lot more dynamic things to them, and also seeing more and more of people's custom-built Space Marine chapters and realizing just how far you can go with how you develop your own Space Marine chapter. That made it a lot more interesting to me. And I do like that about the 40k lore in general, that pretty much every race, every codex, or every army you can play, they give you an excuse to be able to invent your own entire version of that, whether it be a high fleet for Tyranids, a chapter for Space Marines, a regiment for the Imperial Guard, or whatever it happens to be for the other Xenos and Imperium armies as well. Even Chaos can have theirs, although they're probably the most limited in being able to do that. That it allows you to kind of take them and extend what they might be. Are they susceptible to the warp and so often will turn traitor more than others? Are they stoic and immovable like the Grey Knights, who have to this day never had one fall to chaos? Are they cursed because they're part of the, I think it was the cursed 20th founding, 21st founding? And so have some other bad thing happening. The Sentinels of the Forge were from that cursed founding, which is why they've been having so many issues in their narrative campaigns. Or do they hate witches, and so they're Black Templars? Are they super boring, so they're Ultramarines, and they're just like, by the book? And when I say boring, I don't mean that they're boring to play. I mean, like, when you would meet one, they'd just be like, yes, it must be by the book. Or you have all sorts of different personalities, almost comedic in when you look at the original legions and how their personalities came to be, whether it's like the white scars with that kind of Asian or Japanese look to them, and then you've got like the salamanders with their volcanic black skin, and all these different things that they were all based off of one trait that then became that prevalent thing in their gene seed to make them interesting, I guess, or to make them at least different from each other. I still think the funniest thing though is their armor, and how they'll paint it in these super bright colors for some of the chapters, because, camouflage. Even their scouts will have that bright colored armor. So I like them on the table as well. They have obviously a huge assortment of availability for their models, as they rightfully so are one of the more supported lines because they're the best sellers for Games Workshop for Warhammer 40k. And so they just have so many options. They with the new Primaris line as well, that adds even more depth to what you can decide to do with them. They've got access to tons of vehicles, tons of flyers, tons of special rules, and all their different chapters, and lots of Forge World support as well to give us even more stuff if you have the money for that. But it does allow you to, if you want to get into Space Marines, you can really get into them deeply. And there's tons of lore written about them, so you can read about it. You can collect lots of models. There's lots of different play styles for them, which I always appreciate. And it just makes them interesting in my mind. And so they've grown on me. They've grown on me more than any other army because I thought they were boring. And I've realized if you look them on the surface, yeah, they're boring. But as you look deeper in both the models and the lore, you can find a lot more that interests you. And of course, they are the poster boy for Warhammer 40k. If someone were to say, if you had to pick one army to represent Warhammer 40k, what would it be? You wouldn't pick Imperial Guard. You wouldn't pick Tyranids. You wouldn't pick Necrons or Tau. You probably wouldn't pick Eldar. it would most likely pick Space Marines, because that is what everybody thinks about when they think Warhammer 40k. And that is why I love Space Marines.